What if I told you there's a library where the border runs straight across the reading room floor, and until recently, you could walk from Canada into the United States without ever showing a passport? Or a golf course where your clubhouse is in Canada, but your parking lot is in the United States? The US-Canada border is the longest international boundary on Earth between two countries, and it's full of strange, real, documented quirks most people never hear about. These are 25 geography facts about that border you never knew. Number 1 might be the most surprising. Number 25, the world's longest international boundary. Let's start with scale. The US-Canada border is commonly measured at roughly 8,891 kilometers, about 5,525 miles, including the Alaska-Canada section. That makes it the longest international land border between any two countries in the world. Number 24, a cleared strip marks the land border. Across the land sections of the boundary, a cleared strip known as the boundary vista, about 20 feet wide, helps keep the line visible. Trees and structures aren't allowed to encroach on it. It's maintained by the International Boundary Commission, a joint US-Canada agency that's existed since 1908. Number 23, a library built deliberately on the border. The Haskell Free Library and Opera House was built in 1904 straddling the border between Derby Line, Vermont, and Stansted, Quebec. A line of tape marks the boundary across the reading room floor. For more than a century, both Canadians and Americans could use the library's US side entrance without formally reporting to a border checkpoint. But in March 2025, US authorities restricted that Canadian access, citing border security concerns. The building itself still sits on both sides of the line, but current entry rules are stricter than they once were. Number 22, a street split between two countries. Just outside the library, a road called Canusa Street, a blend of Canada and USA, runs along the boundary, with houses on one side reported to sit in the United States and houses on the other in Canada. It's one of several spots in this border region where the line runs directly through a residential street. Number 21, a US town you can only drive to through Canada. Point Roberts, Washington, sits on a small peninsula that dips just below the 49th parallel. Because of that, it's US territory, but it's cut off by water from the rest of the country. To reach it by road from anywhere else in the US, you have to drive through Canada. Number 20, Minnesota's northwest angle. In far northern Minnesota, a small piece of US land called the northwest angle is reachable only by boat, by crossing Canada, or by a long drive through Manitoba. It exists because of the 1783 Treaty of Paris. Negotiators relied on an inaccurate 1755 map that showed Lake of the Woods and the Mississippi River in the wrong positions relative to each other. The border they wrote into the treaty turned out to be geographically impossible to draw as intended, and the resulting oddity, confirmed by later surveys, has remained part of Minnesota ever since. Number 19, a golf course built across the border. Near Fort Fairfield, Maine, and Four Falls, New Brunswick, sits the Aroostook Valley Country Club. Its parking lot and pro shop are in the United States, while its clubhouse and nearly all of its fairways sit in Canada, with part of one tee area and possibly part of a bunker actually crossing into the US. It was built in 1929, during American Prohibition, so members could legally drink at the Canadian side clubhouse after their round. Number 18, over 8,000 boundary monuments. Since the 1800s, surveyors have placed thousands of official boundary markers, obelisks and iron monuments, along the length of the border. They're maintained today by the International Boundary Commission to keep the exact line unmistakable. Number 17, over 1,000 miles along the 49th parallel. From Minnesota to the Pacific coast, the border follows the 49th parallel of latitude for well over 1,000 miles, the result of the Anglo-American Convention of 1818. It's one of the few major borders in the world drawn largely by latitude rather than rivers or mountain ranges. Number 16, a park jointly owned and run by two countries. Campobello Island, in New Brunswick, Canada, was the beloved summer home of U.S. President Franklin D. Roosevelt. In 1964, the two governments signed a treaty creating the Roosevelt-Campobello International Park, jointly owned, funded, staffed, and administered by both nations through a 6-member commission, 3 appointed by each country. Number 15, an indigenous territory split by the border. The Akwesasne Mohawk Territory sits directly on the border, spanning parts of New York State, Ontario, and Quebec. The international line cuts through land the Mohawk people have inhabited long before either the United States or Canada existed, creating jurisdictional complexities that continue today. Number 14, the 1859 Pig War. In 1859, a dispute over the San Juan Islands between the U.S. and British-controlled Canada nearly escalated into armed conflict, after an American farmer shot a British-owned pig that had wandered onto his land. The standoff lasted weeks, but the only reported casualty was the pig. The border dispute itself wasn't fully resolved until international arbitration in 1872. Number 13, a park where the border runs through the gardens. At Blaine, Washington, and Surrey, British Columbia, the Peace Arch Monument was built in 1921 to mark over a century of peace between the two nations. Inside the park itself, visitors from either country can walk across the boundary and mingle without going through a formal port of entry. But the area is still monitored by U.S. Border Patrol and Canadian border authorities, and stepping outside the park's boundaries, into the parking lots or surrounding streets, does require normal border procedures and identification. Number 12, long stretches with no fence at all. Compared to many international borders, huge stretches of the US-Canada line have no wall and no fence, just a cleared vista running through forests, farmland, and open prairie. Number 11, the Klondike Gold Rush border dispute. During the 1898 Klondike Gold Rush, the exact boundary between Alaska and Canada's Yukon became a serious point of contention, since it determined who controlled access to valuable mining routes. The dispute was settled by the Alaska Boundary Tribunal in 1903, largely in the United States' favor, a decision still occasionally debated in Canada. Number 10, towns that function as one community. Derby Line, Vermont, and Stansted, Quebec, have long functioned almost as a single community, sharing a water supply and a sewer system, despite sitting in two different countries. It's one of the closest examples of cross-border civic life anywhere on the continent. Number 9, the border runs through 4 of the 5 Great Lakes. About 1,500 miles of the border pass through fresh water, Lake Superior, Lake Huron, Lake Erie, and Lake Ontario, plus the St. Lawrence River. Lake Michigan, notably, lies entirely within the United States. Still, this makes the border one of the only major international boundaries in the world defined largely by fresh water. Number 8, some border roads zigzag between the two countries. In parts of the northeastern border region, particularly near Quebec, rural roads sometimes weave close to and across the boundary line more than once over a short distance, a reminder of how irregular the 19th century surveying could get in hilly, forested terrain. Number 7, Niagara Falls is split between two countries. Niagara Falls itself straddles the border, the American Falls sit on the U.S. side, while the larger Horseshoe Falls lie mostly on the Canadian side. Many visitors get their best view of the falls by standing on Canadian soil. Number 6, several border town buildings were constructed right on the line. Beyond the Haskell Library, the Derby Line, Stansted area has several other buildings constructed directly on or near the boundary, a quirk of 19th and early 20th century construction in a region where the exact border wasn't always a practical daily concern for builders. Number 5, a commission whose only job is the border itself. Since 1925, the International Boundary Commission, jointly run by the US and Canada, has had one job: maintain the exact line, keep the vista cleared, and resolve any disputes over its precise location. Number 4, shared emergency services in border towns. In towns like Derby Line and Stansted, fire departments have a long history of responding across the border to help their neighbors, because in an emergency, the priority is putting out the fire, not checking a passport. Number 3, farmland that crosses the line. In several agricultural areas along the border, individual farms have fields that extend across the international line, meaning some farmers must coordinate with border authorities simply to work their own land. Number 2, a wilderness where the border is invisible. Between Minnesota and Ontario lies the Boundary Waters Canoe Area, over 1 million acres of interconnected lakes and forest where the international border exists only on paddlers' maps, as canoeists glide silently between two countries without ever seeing a sign. Number 1, one of the world's longest stretches without war. And here's the number 1 fact: despite stretching thousands of miles, with long unfenced stretches and centuries of shared history, the United States and Canada have not gone to war with each other since the War of 1812 ended in 1815. From a library split by a line of tape to a golf course built across two countries, a wilderness with no visible border, and a war that ended over a pig, the line between the US and Canada is one of the strangest, most human borders in the world. If you learned something new, subscribe, and tell me which fact surprised you most in the comments.